So to find the inverse of a function, we've got 4 steps we're going to do. The first step, they're going to give us an equation, okay? And they're going to tell us to find the inverse. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to replace f of x with y. So instead of it being written as f of x equals, we're going to put y equals. Then remember the big thing with inverses is we switch our x and y. So that's step 2. So we're going to switch the x and y, which means anywhere we had a y written, we're going to put an x. And anywhere there was an x, we're going to put a y. Step 3 is we're going to solve for y.
So is it just like that for each one?
When we're looking for an inverse, yes. And then step 4 says that once we solve for y, instead of writing it as y equals, we're going to change it back into a notation. We're going to put the inverse of f of x equals. And then we can verify our result by showing that their compositions work out to equal x when we do it both ways, just like what we did in example 1. So let's try this in example 2. And we're going to call this example 2a because we're going to add an extra example onto this problem, onto these notes. All right, so for example 2, it says find the inverse of f of x equals 2x plus 7. So what was step 1? Do you remember? Yeah, replace f of x with y. So how would I write that? Y equals 2x plus 7? All right, what was step 2? Yeah, so I'm going to switch my x and y. So everywhere there's an x, I'm going to put a y, and everywhere there's a y, I'm going to put an x. So how's that going to be written? Good. Step 3. Solve for y. So we have x equals 2y plus 7. How am I going to solve for y? Okay, so we're going to subtract that 7. So we get x minus 7 equals 2y. And then what do we do? We're going to divide everything by 2. Now typically, guys, last time we were solving for y, we were graphing it. So we took and we divided the x by 2 and the 7 by 2. But because we're doing inverses, I'm just going to do both sides and put it all over 2. So we end up with here x minus 7 all over 2 equals y. Or a lot of y'all like to see y written first, don't you? So we could just write that as y equals x minus 7 all over 2. Did we solve for y? Yes. So what was the final step there? We're going to replace y with our inverse of f of x. So the inverse of f of x is equal to x minus 7 all over 2. Now, it did not tell me here that I had to verify it. But if it did, what would I do?
So the f minus 1x is inverse.
Yeah, the f with the little negative 1 there means the inverse of f of x. So if it told me to verify it, I would take f of our inverse and work that out, and I'd have to take the inverse of f and work it out, just like we did in the previous example, okay? And what should they both equal? They should both equal x, because we said we found the inverse, right? So what happens if one of them's not an x? Then that means they're not inverses, which means first thing I would do is I would check and make sure I didn't make a mistake in my check. And the second thing I would do then is go back and redo my inverse if I didn't find a mistake in my check.